Today I'm joined by Jeff Annison, co-founder and president of Legion M, a fan-owned entertainment company. Welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on your podcast. And second of all, so I am a entrepreneur. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company a little bit over 20 years ago. I was, believe it or not, one of the people responsible for being the first ones to put live television on a cell phone back in 2003, when putting live television on a cell phone was a pretty remarkable feat. Today it seems like, well, hasn't it always been there? But anyway, so that was in 1999 that we started that company, and I've been a serial entrepreneur ever since. And like you said, right now I'm the president and one of the co-founders of Legion M, which is the world's first fan-owned entertainment company. We are taking advantage of some disruptive new securities laws that for the first time allow just regular people to invest and own a piece of Hollywood. So we produce movies and TV shows and virtual reality and that sort of thing. And what makes us different is the fact that we are the first company in history that was designed from the ground up to be owned by small individual fans, as opposed to, a corporate conglomerate or wealthy investors. So our long-term goal, the M in Legion M, is the Roman numeral for 1 million, because our long-term goal is to unite 1 million fans as shareholders of the company. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And I think we'll talk a little bit about the structure of Legion M and kind of being this fan-owned aspect a bit more later on. But I'll just start with a bit of a personal question. As a child, what was your education experience like? And what technology did you wish you had available to you?
Oh, wow. Great question. Well, so, my educational experience, I went to schools, you would call them poor schools, I think, just as far as like test scores. I don't mean socioeconomic, although I think there's obviously a correlation a lot of times. But, to give you an idea, when I was old enough to have children of my own, and I moved back. I live, not far, maybe about half an hour from where I grew up. But when we were looking for homes, we were looking at all the different schools, and there's ratings for all the schools. There's a ranking in California of 1 to 10 at the time, and literally every single school I went to, my elementary school, middle school, and high school, were 1s on the 1 out of 10. And so, they weren't great schools by those standards. I was always a very good student. I've always been very kind of self-motivated. I was able to find people that I resonated with, that had kind of those same values. I hung out with the nerds. And so, I ended up, I think, doing fine. I went on. I actually got accepted to MIT, which was amazing, coming out of my high school. In fact, it might have been because I was coming out of my high school that I got accepted to MIT. But anyway, so that's kind of my educational experience. I can say from a technology standpoint, I was very fortunate because my mother was very interested and on top of the personal computer revolution. So we had, back, I remember when I was in elementary school, our computer lab at school got a couple of, they were Commodore PETs was the name of the computer. And I don't know if that means anything to you or to any of the listeners that are old enough to remember Commodore PETs. So there were some of those in the computer lab, and my mom volunteered to work, and the computer lab was available for what's called it was called at the time Gifted and Talented, which was just, it was kind of like the nerd crew that I talk about. We were identified early, and so there were some special programs that we got to do. And so because of that, I had very early access to those, and because of just my mom and my parents were really into it. Shortly thereafter, we bought a computer. I had a computer in my home, and that was still a really, really rare thing. And I learned to program in BASIC and Logo or Turtle and when I was in elementary school.
That's great. It's interesting because a lot of the problems that I interpret with a lot of new teachers is that they think back to their childhood experience and did not have this kind of more technologically revolutionary experience, and as a result they're kind of biased towards this expectation that doesn't need to exist in schools or is not the reality of things, so they don't try and push for that technology. So that's really valuable.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that is fascinating. I mean, we certainly have had our shares, because I've been obviously a student before. I've never been a teacher myself, although I have guest lectured a couple times in my girls' elementary school. I used one of my jobs coming out of college was I worked in the theme park industry, and so their class would do their 8th grade class, physics class, would always do a unit on physics of roller coasters, and so I would go in and be like a guest lecturer for a day, and grew to have enormous respect for just how hard it was. I mean, I was getting these classes on their best days, right? Because I was like the guest lecturer, and the teacher was like, I'm sure, had cajoled them, however, to make sure they were on their best behavior. And, I was talking about something that was fun and exciting, which was roller coasters. But I just remember, I was teaching on a Wednesday, which was a short day, and I just got home and I was like a puddle of jelly, because it took so much emotion and energy, and I just the thought of doing that and the amount of prep that I did for just that one lesson plan, and just thinking of having to manage that day in and day out would be a real challenge.
Absolutely. So obviously you kind of touched on having access to a lot of things, and we're able to learn a lot in terms of coding and all of this. Do you think that there was anything that you wish you were taught in school? Or kind of to add on to this question, are there any skills that you see missing in a lot of students today?
It's a great question. I think I'll focus on kind of the second half of that, which are, the skills, of today. And I would say, it is, I feel like there's a real challenge for students because you have to make these choices of for example, what classes you're going to do. And you have so little understanding of what those classes are. Right. And it's really kind of, it's even worse when you go to college, right? Because you've got to choose a major, which is really kind of think about it, kind of choosing your career, right? Which is really kind of thinking well, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Right. And you're making that decision as a 17, 18-year-old kid. And, do you even know what anthropology is, sociology? I didn't know what these things were when I was that age. I had no idea. Those are big words. It's not until you get a chance to kind of experiment with stuff that you kind of even know what those things mean. What is engineering? What does it mean to get a degree in engineering? Everyone will tell you, oh, that's hard. Oh, there's a lot of math, and I think that because of that, that's part of the reason why those areas traditionally have been dominated by men, is because, cars and planes and stuff like that is, those tend to be kind of more guy things that guys are interested in. And, for a lot of girls, it can be easier maybe to be intimidated by math, or easier to say, oh, math's lame, right? And stuff like that. I always, there's always a great quote, no one ever would go out and say, I'm illiterate, right? And think that that's cool. But, being able to say oh, math sucks, I'm terrible at math, is that's kind of normally accepted. And so anyway, I didn't mention this at the outset, but I have 4 daughters, which is why I'm probably, even more attuned, to the challenges and, opportunities for women. But I guess where I was kind of going with this long, detailed, rambling answer is to say that it would be great if there were opportunities for people to try stuff. You think of like computer science. I begged and pleaded for my daughters to try taking a computer science course. There are so many opportunities for women in computer science, and it's such a, it's a great field, right? There's, the salaries are high. It's a job that's in high demand, and it's going to be in demand for a long time. And so, my whole philosophy is like, if you don't like computer science, you shouldn't become a computer scientist. If it's really hard for you because you don't, again, some people really do struggle at math, and that's a thing. And so, it's not, obviously no one major is right for everyone, but it's just to use that as an example. But it's like, if you can dip a toe and get some exposure to it, then who knows? And I've got of my daughters, 2 of them, I don't think they even took a computer science class because they weren't interested, and there was never an opportunity, and unless they wanted to commit, to taking that, it was a real challenge. My other 2 daughters, one of them is studying computer science in college right now. One of them is in high school. Her first computer science class, she was the only girl in the class, which was super intimidating for her. And again, would be a great reason to not take that class in general. So anyway, bottom line is, I think that having ways where it is easy for people to sample stuff, rotational sort of classes where you can get a taste and understand a little bit of what some of these things are, I feel like would be really helpful for students as they, kind of chart their course and choose their electives in high school, and then go on to choose their major and choose their courses in college.
It's very true in terms of, especially when it comes to some of these higher education stuff where there is so much pressure, there isn't the ability to experiment without risk of failure. And as well, just in all of these, tracks for advanced students kind of can even force people into a specific, major even earlier than 17, 18. So it really restricts that. And you touched on it briefly, but the idea of gender inequality within subjects within itself reinforces that, because no one feels comfortable being the only person in a group. So by nature, that kind of prevents anyone from wanting to continue that, and then it just reinforces it over. So it's definitely a problem that teachers are always thinking about, and it's important that we consider how to make failure more acceptable and to explore all those different options. Those are some great points.
I totally agree. And so as an entrepreneur, what you said about making failure an option and not being afraid to fail is that is the game when you are an entrepreneur. It's coming to terms with the fact that you are going to make mistakes, and what makes you a successful entrepreneur is the fact that you learn how to make mistakes quickly so that you can learn from them and move on to the next thing, and how you can make mistakes safely, right? Like, what are ways that you can not bet your company or your career on this decision, but ways that you can kind of dip a toe or learn something that then allows you to kind of move on to the next phase. And so, yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so as we know, the entertainment industry is far beyond schools in terms of technological implementation and use. Are there any new technologies that you have found useful or unique within your own practice? And do you think we could bring those into education?
So absolutely, and this is such a timely question because I think we have had over the past year this massive forced social experiment with remote learning, and I feel like that to me is such an interesting topic because I've got a couple friends who are teachers that I've talked to about. My wife is actually studying right now. Now that my oldest is going off, she's in high school. My youngest is in high school, and my other three daughters are all independent. She's going and studying to get her teaching credential to teach elementary school, K through 6. And so, anyway, I guess the point was that I know from what I've read, I don't know this from personal experience, but from what I've read and from my discussions with teachers, that there are a lot of kids that have really struggled during remote learning, and a lot of them because they don't have access to, maybe it's bandwidth or a computer or a dedicated quiet space or that sort of stuff. And there's also, I think, a lot of kids that need the in-person part of it, to be able to maintain their focus and their attention and to get the social aspect. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you learn in school aside from the subject matter. But I also know, or I understand, that there's a lot of kids that have thrived in this environment. And if you think about it, things like, people that deal with social anxiety at school, and, people that, are bullied, or people that are like super shy or have problems, relating with people, I think, that don't need to deal with that. I think those are people that this has actually probably been a positive step for, because now they're getting their education without kind of all the things that might have been standing in their way before. I think if you think about logistical challenges for people that, maybe have transportation issues getting to school that might cause them to drop out of school. What about people that only live in a place where the school option that is available to them from a logistical standpoint, like the school that they can literally get to every day, is a bad fit for them, but there's an amazing school, that's 45 minutes away, and if only they could go there, it would be the right school for them because of the subject matter, or, the students that are there, or whatever. So I think that it really kind of opens the door. And so just like the tools that we're all now familiar with that used to be exotic, with Zoom, or online collaboration tools like Slack and Discord and stuff like that, I think are all really valuable ways. And what I'm really interested to see is, after this year of kind of this forced social experiment where, so many of us have been forced to try these things, how does that end up, manifesting itself over the next, 5 years? Does everything snap back and we all just, it goes back to where it was prior to COVID? Do we see that, maybe new models emerge? Do new schools emerge for students now that we've seen that like remote learning can work, and we've started to take off some of the bugs, and some people have said, hey, I like this better? Like, are there new schools that emerge? Are there new models that kind of lean into that? The whole online coursework, I think, is something that is, there's a lot of stuff that you need teacher to pupil sort of interaction, and I think there's a lot of stuff that you need social collaboration, and those can be really important. But if you think about it, somebody explaining, somebody standing in front of a classroom, explaining how differential equations work, or Newton's 3 laws, that lesson happens hundreds of thousands of times per year in America. Like, every single classroom, there's a physics teacher that stands up and explains Newton's 3 laws to their classroom of students. But if you think about it, just kind of like, somebody out there did it better than anybody else, right? What if you could bring in some producers and create an amazing video that would take the very best explanation of it and and create a produced piece that was interesting and engaging, that that explained it better than anybody else, and then made that literally available to everybody in the world, via digital technology where there's no incremental cost, and then had somebody there that could take questions, on the local level to help explain it. I think there's a lot of stuff like that. Like for me, I feel like the education is in a time where, because of COVID, there could be a significant amount of changes and disruptions that emerge.
Absolutely. That's kind of going. There's kind of a joke of a student, or a teacher teaching something, and it's a concept and the student doesn't understand, and then they just look it up on YouTube, and the person on YouTube just explains it perfectly easily.
Yeah.
And I've also read an article about a student with schizophrenia who was kind of explaining how the access to online programs opening up being able to get graduate degrees that are prestigious and have academic merit, and the value of that. So there's definitely some really interesting things that, like you said, hopefully will stick. This is a little bit related, but I'm curious, is there any underdeveloped or completely uncreated technology that you would want to see, whether that's for entertainment or education or both? Like, is there any sort of problem that we need a solution for?
That's a great question. There's nothing that I can immediately point to, other than one thing that I'll say that I think is really interesting is the emerging like virtual reality and augmented reality technology, because I feel like we are still that is in its infancy, and the technology, if you've tried, we've done a couple virtual reality projects at Legion M. So we got an HTC Vive a few years ago, and I've probably had more experience than most with virtual reality, and the technology is not it's not there yet, but I believe that it will be. Like the whole Ready Player One, like I don't think that is some fantasy that will never happen. I think that is an alternate future that we are heading towards, and whether it's the Oasis or some other sort of kind of paradigm and all that sort of stuff, at the end of the day, we're not that far off, I think, from the fact that you'll be able to put on a pair of goggles that are relatively lightweight and will someday be relatively inexpensive, and the technology will be such that it will be visually almost indistinguishable from from actual reality. Like I feel like that is something that will happen, and I don't know if it's it's kind of like self-driving cars. Is it 5 years from now? Is it 20 years from now?
Yeah.
It's not like a quantum leap. It's like a steady slope as we get there. And so anyway, I think that's really interesting and really does open the doors to ways to just entirely new models, I think. And again, I don't know enough about the psychology and the and all that sort of stuff, but it's I would imagine that would be a massive.
This kind of leads me to another question. It's a bit of a rabbit hole, but with education, and you touched on this a little bit, with VR and having realism within a VR experience. Let's say, for example, you try and teach a war through an immersive VR experience. Well, obviously, there's risks of creating PTSD, which shows hypocrisy in creating war. But regardless, do you think that there is artistic value in hyperrealism, and also is there educational value in that within a VR space?
Yeah, it's a really good. I mean, it's a really fascinating question, and you're right. I kind of feel like it could be a rabbit hole. It's not something that I've considered that much. I just when I remember when I was in high school, I hated history. Just to use this as a kind of an example, and history for me in high school was dry. It was trying to remember a bunch of facts and figures. It was black and white, small images in a textbook, surrounded by big blocks of text. And, you know, in my particular case, I mean, there are amazing history teachers out there, but, dry, boring teachers. And so, when I went to college, I took some history classes and loved it. And, I actually love history and, like watching documentaries, like it takes you that much closer. And I feel that being able to put people in different circumstances is probably got to be one of the biggest ways or best ways to like truly open someone's mind, and make them understand and make it relevant. Because at the end of the day, history is not a subject. It's literally a person like you and a person like me and what we were doing 1,000 years ago, and that interaction, and the learning the lessons from the people and trying to avoid the mistakes and trying to understand human nature and each other and all that sort of stuff. And I just feel like there's so much opportunity there. And so I mean, you bring up a really good point about war. I mean, the first 5 minutes of Saving Private Ryan are extremely disturbing to people. But, I mean, if that's what actually happened, are we doing a disservice to people to not show them that? I remember somebody arguing at the time that, God, what was it? They were talking about, I want to say that the argument was that the people that were, they were questioning whether it needed to be rated R or, whatever. And they were saying, like, guys, the people that were dying in those scenes were younger than the people that were talking about should they have the ability to watch this movie. And so, like I think that there's a lot that you can kind of get into there.
Yeah.
I remember in the VR space, there was one video or experience, I should say, I think that's what you would call it, that I never saw. Everybody that saw it, like I just never had an opportunity to see it, but it like won awards because it was talking about something that we all know, which is I think it was about stuff going on in Africa, where students, like small children, are kidnapped and militarized, radicalized, and all that sort of stuff. And it's something that we all know at like a logical level and an intellectual level, but you would read the reviews and the people talking about it was like a 5-minute video, and people would say that after those 5 minutes you came out and it just shook you to your core, to realize that this was something that was actually going on. It was actually happening right now, and these were real people and all that sort of stuff. So like I feel like that's really the power, and I think that I think I think it will hopefully do us a lot of good. I'm sure we'll find ways to screw us up.
Yeah. I heard I'm forgetting the name of the director, but he had an interesting take on ratings and saying that people, it should be for older audiences that can handle the fantasy of there being no repercussions for shooting someone, than the opposite of showing all the blood and gore at the higher rating, right?
That's actually a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. And another thing that's kind of relating to this is there's this famous historical photo of an early black and white photo of this guy who's eating rice, and he's got like a big smile on, and a lot of people think that it's fake when they first see it because, people really didn't take the time to sit and have a fully developed photo of them smiling. So it kind of just mentally ingrains that perception that, no one smiled back then. But it's just kind of that interesting idea of what you discussed was that it is so important to realize that um, history is of people exactly like us today, and to be able to recognize those that genuine human connection is so important. As a history major, I very much like that. Um, Holding student attention, just like audiences within entertainment, is a constant battle against all the, you know, got the two additional screens, three additional screens, and everything that's coming at them, right? So, from your experience, do you know of any other implementations of tactics or technology that help hold attention, which could then be applied to education?
You know, well, first of all, you're totally right, and I think that children today have it 100 times worse than we did because of the fact that there are so many more distractions. And not only that, but I think that because of things like social media and TikTok, and the shortening of the attention span, in some ways I worry that we're rewiring our brains. And again, this is it's you can love it or you can hate it, but it's happened, right? And so the question is like, okay, well, how do you deal with that? What systems, what societies, what cultures are going to deal with this? Are going to deal with this best. And so, I think that Hollywood is kind of an interesting model because it's about storytelling, and it's Hollywood's whole purpose is to find ways to keep you engaged. And so I think there are probably a lot of lessons. I think having a background in Hollywood and storytelling and creative writing and that sort of thing would probably be extremely valuable as a teacher, because at the end of the day, you've got a classroom full of students that would much rather be on their phones, and their brains are kind of wired to like 30-second sort of increments, and you need to hold their attention for an hour-long lesson so that you can explain something that is intricate and complex and cannot be reduced to 30 seconds sort of nuggets. And like, it can be done. Like, people still watch movies and they still read novels and all that sort of stuff, but I would imagine that would be very helpful as a teacher to have that as a background.
Absolutely. I think that stuff with research too, the structure of TED Talks is research backed, and that idea that attention span for holding on to a singular concept kind of levels around 15 minutes to 20 minutes, and then that kind of scales by age. So there's a lot of ways in terms of breaking up stuff and giving just mental breaks for students, and also, like you said, making sure that you can kind of master storytelling.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Like, I wasn't aware. I mean, it totally makes sense. Again, like, there's psychology behind all this sort of stuff, and there's, but I'm curious. Like, do has the advent of social media has it changed any of that? Like are students less open, less tolerant, less accepting of longer form content now that we are so inundated with short form content? Or is that just the kind of like a
I don't know the research behind specifically long versus short content, but I do know that the general existence of more distractions by the fact that you can just pull out your phone, and it's kind of that mental like behaviorist association of getting a notification or something like that and wanting to check it, so can be distracting. So I do know that the presence of all the distractions that technologies offer can be restraining. But I don't know specifically about like attention span.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting. I would imagine another area where Hollywood overlaps with teaching and good teaching is performance, right? I mean, as a teacher, your job is to go up there and take whatever the subject is and to make it, to communicate that, to teach the students. And I imagine it's, you're much more effective when you have rapt students that are paying attention to you and caring about what you say. And a lot of that, could very well come down to performance, the same way that, your job as an entertainer is to make people laugh or to make them feel something. And so, that whole, the performative aspect of teaching is something that's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. So I think that's about it. The stage is now yours. Is there anything you want to share with future educators listening about technology, entertainment, or just life?
Wow, that is a big that is a big question. No, all I would say to future educators is go forth and do it. Is there any more noble? Is there any more noble profession, endeavor, goal in life than to better the world? Is there any bigger lever that anybody has, on the world than to be a teacher? Think about all the different people that you are engaging with and helping and, hopefully inspiring and all that sort of stuff. And so, like I said kind of earlier, I think that trying to find ways to innovate, trying to find ways to relate, to make the stuff exciting. It's just go do it, try stuff. Definitely, I think staying on the leading edge of technology, I think, is really valuable because the kids are going to be there, and there's so much stuff. It's funny when I think of the teachers that I've interacted with at like my kids' schools. I've seen the whole range. I've seen people that honestly probably cannot figure out an iPhone, right? Because they've checked out. Like, hey, I'm a middle school teacher. What do I need to know about technology for, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, I've seen one of my daughter's middle school teacher had his own website and had been investing in effectively creating his curriculum and his lesson plan and all that sort of stuff online, and he was incredible, and the kids related to him, and so anyway, I don't know that I've got any meaningful advice to give, having never been a teacher. All I can say is thank you for what you are doing, and good luck and Godspeed.
That's great, and thank you for this interview. It has been a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This has been great.